Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. You know, I have a golden rule, and that rule is that I never historically judge a fighter until his career is over. The reason for this is there have been people who have been flying so incredibly high, you think, well, this guy belongs with the absolute greats, and then they've come crashing down. In my lifetime, Donald Curry is one of them. Looked absolutely magnificent in unifying the titles, become an undisputed champion, and then probably stayed at welterweight too long. Got smashed up by Lloyd Honeyghan and was never the same again. Another one would be Mike Tyson, who at the time seemed literally unbeatable. I mean, Tyson turned pro in 85, was it? So I would have turned 18. And I can remember talking to my grandfather, who, if he was alive today, would be well over 100 years old. He always cited Marciano, Ali, and Lewis as his favourite three heavyweights from his lifetime. And he would look at Tyson and he would say, "This kid's special. This kid's incredible," you know. And yet we know what happened with Tyson and Buster Douglas. I mean, those are two obvious examples, but I find it nigh on impossible to mention Naoya Inoue without it crossing my mind that he is the greatest Japanese fighter of all time. Now, the one that everybody previously spoke of was fighting Harada, who himself was a great champion. Fought between 1960 and 1970, had 62 fights, 55 wins, 7 defeats, and 2 were by stoppage, I think. I don't think he had any draws. And he had 22 knockouts in the win column. So he wasn't a big puncher, not like Inoue. But make no mistake about it, he was a great fighter. And in 10 years, he crammed in 62 fights. And he fought some brilliant men and beat them as well. He actually won his first title at flyweight. He won the WBA world title against Pone Kingpech of Thailand, but then lost it on a majority decision over 50. He actually stopped Kingpech in 11 rounds in the first fight. And then he lost a majority decision over in Bangkok in the return. The first fight was in Japan, so they did one in either's backyard, so to speak. He moved up. Didn't take him long to start smashing people up at Bantam. There was no super flyweight division in those days. And the person he beat to win the WBA and the WBC bantamweight titles was none other than Ada Joffre, who was a magnificent Brazilian fighter, and who at the time had 50 fights with 47 wins, 3 draws and no defeats. And Joffre went over to Japan because in those days the world champions travelled. They were literally world champions. And fighting Harada beat him on a split decision over 15 rounds. Don't forget, these were the old 15-rounders. British fans will always remember the unanimous decision loss by Alan Rudkin that was over in Japan as well, to Harada, who retained both those the WBA and the WBC bantam titles. He then had a rematch with Joffre, and guess what? He beat him again. 15-round decision, unanimous this time, again in Japan, over in the Budokan, very famous venue. He beat, let me think now, there was, who else did he beat? Lionel, oh no, he lost to Lionel Rose, that's right. He fought Lionel Rose and lost over 15 rounds. That's when he actually lost his WBA and WBC titles. But make no mistake about it, Lionel Rose was a great Australian fighter, Aboriginal origins. So not really a shame, no great shame in losing to Lionel Rose. That was in 1968. He lost the titles. He won them in 65, I think. And then he carried on. He went up to featherweight, but couldn't quite get over the line with winning the featherweight title because he challenged another Australian, Johnny Famersham. He challenged him in Sydney, lost over 15 rounds. 2 fights later, Famersham came to Japan and actually stopped fighting Harada in 14 rounds. And that was fighting Harada's final fight. So if there were all these, super fly, super bantam, so on and so forth, you know, he would have picked up other titles, put it that way. You've got to judge each fighter by his or her era. So that's some record, a great fighter fighting Harada. But Inoue he's only 30. He is so spectacularly dominant and has been from when he won his first world title, which was the light fly title, back in 2014 to Adrian Hernandez. He stopped Hernandez in 6 rounds. I think that was only his 5th or 6th fight, something like that. 6th fight maybe. And then he skipped over flyweight, went straight to super flyweight, destroyed Omar Narvaez in only 2 rounds, who had never been stopped before, and actually had a record of 43 wins, 1 defeat, which was on points to Nonito Donaire, and 2 draws. And he just got wiped out by Inoue. And Narvaez had made, I think, about 12, 13 defences of his title, of his WBO title. Then, as we know, he defended the Superfly title several times. David Kimura went 12, but I think there were a couple of early knockouts. I can't remember against who offhand. I'll have to look it up. And eventually, of course, he moved up to, after making a string of defences of that Superfly title, he moved up to bantamweight. He was part of the World Boxing Super Series, won it, was destroying people at bantamweight like there was no tomorrow, just wiping them out completely. He won his first bantamweight title actually in a first round knockout over Jamie McDonnell, and that was for the WBA title. And like I say, he'd already made a string of defences at Superfly, so moving up to bantam, he probably, he had grown into the division. It was probably, very genuine that he couldn't make Superfly anymore. And that was like a new lease of life. I mean, Juan Carlos Payano went out in a round. They were back-to-back 1-round knockouts, McDonnell and Payano. Emmanuel Rodriguez was undefeated at the time, 19-0. He got smashed to bits in 2 rounds. I mean, he was down 3 times in the second round. These aren't eking out victories. These are smashing established, decent level fighters to bits. And then, of course, came the crash bang wallop shootout with Nonito Donaire, 12 rounds of mayhem, a brilliant fight, won by Inoue, who had his eye socket busted early on, second or third round, carried on fighting and staying so disciplined and so poised, despite having such a horrendous injury, floored Donaire late in the fight with a body shot. Donaire himself, a great fighter, really excellent. And in the rematch, Donaire was no match for Inoue, got blown to bits in 2 rounds, floored in the first and finished off that. And that was for the IBF, WBA and WBC titles. Donaire actually, I think, held the WBC title at the time, which he'd won off a Frenchman whose name escapes me. But anyway, he was no match in the rematch for Inoue. And in the mix, I mean, Jason Maloney, for example, who is still, he won the world, the WBO version of the bantamweight title after Inoue vacated it. He only lasted 7 rounds with Inoue. I mean, some of these sort of so-called B plus level fighters they're actually growing in stature on Inoue's record. People like Jason Maloney, he's a good fighter. Like I mentioned, Emmanuel Rodriguez, he's a good fighter. And then he completed the 4-belt era unanimous undisputed title by stopping Paul Butler in 11 rounds. Butler incredibly negative, just ran for dear life. Inoue, who has some real spite to him. He's not the usual, there isn't the usual Japanese politeness with Inoue. There's some real nastiness about him. He was actually deriding Butler during the fight, waving him in, ridiculing him, and with good cause, because Butler just ran, basically. He ran and eventually got clobbered to the body and the head by the ropes and got stopped in 11. Then it was time to move up to super bantamweight, and of course we know what happened earlier this year. He had that fantastic week where Naoya Inoue destroyed Stephen Fulton, who was expected to give him problems and gave him absolutely none. Fulton got stopped in 8 rounds, floored and then stopped. In every respect, Inoue was better. He hit harder. His accuracy was better. He found the range better. The rhythm of his work was better. Fulton was really flailing. And Fulton is not a mug. Again, I repeat, this is a good fighter, made to look extremely ordinary by an absolute killer of a super bantamweight. So now we have Inoue seeking to become undisputed champion in a second weight division in 1 calendar year, essentially. Well, not one, no, a little bit longer. Yeah, it's probably about a year and a week or a year and 2 weeks, something like that. And he takes on Marlon Tapales. Now, Tapales has 37 wins, 19 KOs, 3 defeats, but most notably 2 are by stoppage. He's 31 years of age, he's from the Philippines, and he gets this, I guess you'd call it a winning lottery ticket, although I wouldn't call going in with Naoya Inoue a winning lottery ticket, but he's getting the big payday anyway. He got this by defeating Murodjon Akhmadaliev, who actually made a comeback last Saturday. Akhmadaliev was 11-0 at the time, and Tapales, it was a very, very close fight. He won a split decision over Akhmadaliev. Akhmadaliev had him in some difficulty, but he kind of rode out the storm and was able to, pinch rounds with good, tidy boxing. Akhmadaliev probably, I don't know whether he fell asleep at the wheel or he just got frustrated, but he was loading up too much in that fight. And to be honest with you, yeah, I didn't really have a problem. But a lot of people say they thought Akhmadaliev won. I mean, okay, but I didn't really have a problem with the decision overall, to be honest with you. But if you sift through Tapales' previous record, I mean, he got stopped by Ryosuke Asawa. That was, I can't remember when that was, 2020, 2019, something like that. That was for an interim IBF belt, and he got stopped in 11 rounds. That was his last defeat. Since then, he's had the 4 victories. Is it Asawa or Iwasa? Something like that. I can't remember the guy's name. But this Japanese fighter himself had a few defeats on his record, but still managed to stop Tapales. Previously, I mean, Tapales won the WBO bantamweight title. That was back in, I think, about 2016, 2015. And defended it, I think, once or twice before he moved up to super bantamweight. So he does have experience at world level, but if you look at his record, comparing it to Inoue's, it just doesn't, it's chalk and cheese. There is no comparison. There really isn't. And I can't, as try as I might, I just can't see a way in which he can sort of defeat Inoue. I always like to play devil's advocate with these prediction videos and say, well, what about this? And have you thought about that? But, I mean, the way Inoue dismantled Fulton, who many thought might beat Inoue, not just do well, but, beat him. If Inoue is 80% of that man, I can see him knocking out Tapales quite early. And I can't, even though Tapales, he's game, he's tough, he's a good fighter, he's a 2-weight world champ, does the basics pretty well. I can't really see what he can do with Inoue. Inoue is just too damn good. And yes, I have to say, I think, I cannot get away from the thought that Inoue is probably the best Japanese fighter who's ever lived. So, I think Naoya Inoue will win this fight by knockout. The question is when, and I will go for a Naoya Inoue knockout victory in rounds 4, 5, 6. I'll say 4. I'll go with a 4th round knockout. Okay. I just think those 3 rounds, 4, 5, 6, around about that point, yeah, I just think Inoue will catch up with him and chop him down. And I think Tapales will be very game. I think he might go on the floor and get up and come back for more. But even in terms of size, he hasn't got much. I mean, he's moved up from bantamweight. He's 5'4". Inoue is about 5'3". I don't think there's much difference in the. I think Inoue has actually got longer arms, if I remember reading rightly, in terms of the reach. The age is similar, 31 to Inoue's 30. I just don't see what Tapales can do. I think he gets knocked out in about 4 rounds. That's my honest opinion. This fight, of course, is on Boxing Day. What a Boxing Day present. Fantastic stuff. And watch this card. Do you know what? I'm going to be away on that day. And I won't be able to watch it live, which is really pissing me off. But, you know, sometimes family's got to come first. There are some things that are actually more important than boxing. Hard though it is to believe. But yeah, I'll definitely be watching this at some point and doing a review of it. And the whole card is worth watching as well. Have a look at the card. I mean, the card is these Japanese cards, they really do fly under the radar. I know Matchroom have done a deal with a Japanese promotional company to bring some of the Japanese cards to the West, and I can't say this is, you know, before time. It really isn't. They always have good quality matchups. You know, undefeated fighter versus undefeated fighter. Lots of bantams, lots of flyweights on there. They might go as high as featherweight sometimes, but you know, I love these lower weights. I always have done. There's so much action to be had. So anyway, Boxing Day is the day. Naoya Inoue to beat Tapales in about 4 rounds, I would say. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments below and I'll have a look at them. And of course, thank you as always for your time. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the like button as well if you don't mind. And I will catch you later. Looking forward to reading your comments. Bye for now.